When did Spyglass Siren become a tier 1 staple? Where did the new tokens decks come from? We've got bats, boats, and knockout blows, so like this video and subscribe to find out the answers as we ride the tide of Ixalan's vibe.
It only matters if it ladders, so comment below and let us know as we walk through the Week 2 recap of Standard and Ixalan. Alrighty, so Hyper Aggro has fallen, Azorius Tokens has risen with the return of Domain once more to Tier 1 land.
Tier 2 features the remnants of Boros Aggro. If you're wondering where Golgari Aggro and the many flavors of midrange are, you can find them at your local graveyard, where they died during the Phyrexian invasion known as Domain.
And last but not least, in Brewer's Corner, we'll cover Boros Discover, Merfolk, Mono Blue Flyers, and Orzhov Angels. But for now, let's kick things off with Her Majesty's return to power and talk about Domain. Alrighty, Max. Just when we thought we were out, they pulled us back in. Domain took down the MTGO Showcase Challenge this past weekend in the hands of Snoo Emmerich. Their build, featuring 6 Wrath effects in the main board, eschewing the usual virtues of Persistence and Throat Goats, while including the rarely seen Nissa Ascended Animist in the main, continues to prove that while Domain can be beaten, it can also just reposition and reload week to week once it knows what its main prey is going to be. Now, it's worth noting it also took down a trophy at the Brewer CH Cup in Osaka, Japan, under pilot Takeshi Takuya. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. I'm terrible at that, I know. Running a very similar build with 6 Wraths in the main again. Let's also note that there are 2 temporary lockdowns in each of their sideboards. This is really just a way of saying beware to all the token decks, to all the soldier builds, because this Domain build came to wreck your go-wide strategy. And let's also note that there are 4 Cavern of Souls in the main. If you're hell-bent on getting those angels into play, this is that build.
Wow, who called that? Domain being back.
Right.
Staying on top of things. I see that the deck, and really in many ways, has returned to its ramp roots. What do you think is the reason, in particular, for the one Nissa over something like Kaya, Breach, Itali, things we've seen in the past in that slot?
Well, I think the main reason we're not going to see Breach or Itali right now is that it doesn't really fit into the Cavern of Souls plan, and it also doesn't net you a great card from your opponents often. You know what I mean? Like, Shieldred's not in the main of any of these other tier 1 lists anymore. You're mostly going to grab things like Destroy Evil. Imagine if you play Itali and you get an Invasion of Zendikar and a Spyglass Siren. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to be kind of pissed. And that's going to happen because a lot of these decks are, the Azorius decks at least, they're more about the synergy than they are about the individual card power level. So I don't think Itali or Breach is necessarily where you want to be on that front. Nissa, on the other hand, is just a powerhouse. Like, it forces them to commit to the board, it forces them to overextend resources, or else it just takes the game over on its own. And at the same time, it's a really good way to break the mirror when you want to deal with those up the beanstalks, when you want to deal with other enchantments like Leyline. It forces your opponent into awkward positions, which is why I think the Nissa is getting the nod over the Kaya, because Nissa can go minus, like just turn after turn. We'll just keep blowing it up unless you deal with it. So I think that's why I mostly got the nod.
Yeah, and going plus and clogging up the board against decks like Golgari as well. So yeah, I can see why Nissa would be the choice there. Let's move on and talk about the next deck, Azorius Tokens.
Now, Max, we heard rumors of a decent token list in these past few weeks, but it has finally emerged, taking 2 slots in the Showcase Challenge top 8 and finishing in 2nd place there, as well as the Brewer CH Cup in Japan this past weekend. Now, while the builds are still varying to a decent degree, the concept remains fairly simple at this point. This is an efficient go-wide strategy with access to counters and a surprisingly fast start off the back of Spyglass Siren into Boat, and these are the 2 strongest additions from Ixalan. Now, the Schooner really brought this archetype into the limelight and out of that tier 3 hell it was stuck in for a long time. And I should know, I tried to build this like 5 different ways last season, and I could not find a path through because it was frankly missing an awesome 2-drop and an awesome 1-drop, which Siren and Schooner do. I love this build in particular over the others because we see the Invasion of Segovia, and let's note that Invasion of Segovia, the turn it hits, if you go Siren, Schooner, Segovia, you can use one of the tokens to crew the Schooner and flip that Invasion of Segovia immediately. So that's something it never had the ability to do before. It was never able to go turn 3 Segovia, flip Segovia, and now it can, and that's making a huge difference in my opinion.
Okay. I wanted to just ask about one card, Warden of the Inner Sky. I know we've discussed the value of that card, whether that's really good in that slot or not. I've thought about Knight Errant of Eos, especially with Segovia allowing you to go wide, have as many creature tokens as possible. But that could also enable Warden of the Inner Sky. Which of those do you like for this deck list?
So when we look at Knight Errant of Eos, there needs to be a certain number of creature cards. That tokens list actually only has 12 creature cards. So that's why I don't think it can run the Knight Errant, because it's going to miss. Like it kind of has the collected company stat line rules where if you're going to run Knight Errant of Eos, a majority of your deck needs to be hit by it. Otherwise, you're going to run the risk of doing all of this work for a payoff that isn't the 3-for-1 that you want out of Knight Errant. So I just don't think it's as good. Warden of the Inner Sky is a lot better in Explorer and Pioneer than it is in Standard right now, but it's still pretty damn good here. And with all these tokens coming out, especially with Segovia flipping, you have a lot of scenarios where you can tap down your whole board, and then on end step it just untaps. So you don't mind tapping 3 creatures to pump up the ward and then get through in the sky, because you're just going to untap them on end step and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Definitely apply the collected company rule to this one. All right, talk to us about Esper Midrange.
So half of the MTGO Showcase Top 8 was filled with Esper mid-range decks, though none of them made it to the finals. Now, Slack's list, which is shown here, came closest with a third-place finish, featuring the Bat, the Boat, and a Knockout Blow. This list has tuned Esper midrange into the low-curve tempo powerhouse that we've enjoyed for months now. The real question at this point is whether it can reliably push back against a domain list featuring 4 caverns and the go-wide strategies of soldiers and tokens. Now, my personal guess here, Max, is that we're going to see some shifts in the sideboard to accommodate one-sided sweepers such as Nightclubber or Shrouded Shepherd, and those are the two that immediately come to mind for me. But also, there's probably going to be some more hand disruption in the form of Duress or Pilfer to push back against Cavern of Souls and Domain, because if we can't counter what we need to counter, we can still rip it out of their hand. And sometimes that's how you got to play that game. You have to have, kind of that mixture, that medley of Disdainful Stroke and Duress. You just got to push back that way. So I think we'll see it. It's just going to take some adjustments.
Definitely a good strategy against Domain. Deep Cavern Bat, talking about ripping things out of hands, has been making the rounds in all sorts of lists that have black included. For the players at home, what do you advise in terms of what to take in the opening hand when you see it against the different decks like Domain, Tokens decks, Esper Midrange? What do you advise the people at home take?
So that's a difficult question to answer. It's very context dependent. It reminds me of the days when you're playing Rakdos midrange and you play Thoughtseize on turn 1, and they have all these hypotheticals. People will post it up, like, what's the pick? And it's very much context dependent. Like, are you on game 1? Are you on the post board games? Do you know what your opponent's deck list is? Are you playing blind on turn 2? How much information do you have to work with? What is the path that your hand is pushing towards? Because you're going to have hands where you go Bat into Rafine, and what you're going to need to take in those instances is going to be very different than if you need to go Bat into Wedding Announcement. So I think that it's just too context dependent to have a hard and fast rule when it comes to the Bat. Just be aware as you're playing it that what you're going to want to take is not necessarily going to be the strongest card in their hand. Sometimes what you're doing is you're just ripping a removal spell to make sure Rafine sticks, so that you can draw into additional bats or additional things that can rip out the powerhouses or counters for what's going on up the curve. Make sure what you're doing is as disruptive as possible, and I think that's the only hard, fast rule with the bats.
Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. I like the sound of that. All right, let's talk about the last deck in Tier 1, Azorius Soldiers.
So Azorius Soldiers, for the first time in a long time, didn't take any trophies or put up amazing results, but it still pulled off a top 8, and it remains a force to be reckoned with, so we'll keep it at the top tier for now. Orance Pro took the following list into the top 8 of the MTGO Showcase, highlighting that Malcolm is a firm 2 of in Soldiers, and Get Lost has also earned a few slots in the sideboard at this point. How this deck is going to handle the new domain list, I don't know. That is going to be a huge challenge, because as you can tell looking at this list, the 4 make disappears, the 3 protect the negotiators. Pre-Cavern of Souls, that was enough. You could handle domain lists. You were going to be favored like 60-40 in that. It wasn't going to be amazing, but you could add Disdainful Strokes into the sideboard if you really wanted to run away with it, right? Now we have 4 Cavern of Souls and 7 Angels that can't be countered, that need to be countered because they set this deck back so heavily. And it's not even Atraxa that is the concern, because often the turn they play Atraxa, you just wear Fox Bodyguard, don't care, swing through, win the game. It's the Archangel of Wrath. It's the ability to play that uncounterably and on impact kill 2 of your creatures while gaining 4 life and putting a body out there. That is the biggest threat, in my opinion, for Soldiers, is the Archangel of Wrath, not the Atraxa.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. That might be a hot take in some circles, but I think I agree with you there. Now, I did want to ask about the Soldier status of the Soldiers deck. We keep revisiting this topic, but this list is really solidified around certain cards, and now around Knight Errant, around Malcolm. Despite the fact that these big important cards for the deck aren't Soldiers, do you feel like Cavern of Souls' inclusion pushes this deck back towards including Harbin and the overrun with Soldiers type strategy?
So I think the sneaky secret of Soldiers at this point is you're only running 15 Soldiers, but at the same time you have 4 Knight Errant of Eos to search for the additional Soldiers you need in order to make sure that Harbin gets off the ground and rolling, and Resolute Reinforcements, unless I'm mistaken, no, it gives you 2 Soldiers. So you're already with 2 Resolute Reinforcements and 1 Harbin, you're activating Harbin. And you can get 2/3 of that off Knight Errant of Eos. So I think that's the sneaky back door to not having to play a ton of Soldiers while still getting the benefits of Harbin. Because at this point, that's really why we're playing Soldiers, is because we want the benefits of Harbin on that sweet little unlock the combo Alpha Strike you.
Okay. Yeah. Sneaky backdoor to get through. I love the sound of that. That's really cool. And Soldiers does it really well. Let's go ahead and drop down to tier 2. And I'll kick things off by talking about Boros Aggro. Oh, how the mighty aggro have fallen. We do see a copy by Elfkid in 10th place at the MTGO showcase for Boros Aggro. Not really much else, unfortunately. Last week, we discussed the likely issues this deck has with sweepers, and sure enough, Domain has adjusted accordingly, pushing the hyper aggro decks back once more. There isn't much more to be done when it comes to this deck, honestly, against that strategy. Invasion of Gobakon, Noid Peacekeepers are decent stutter steps, tempo plays. But ultimately, you're going to end up in a bunch of, well, if they have Sunfall, if they have that sweeper, I lose. Otherwise, I win. And that's really not an ideal situation to be in with Domain on the rise once more. I will note, however, there are some small adjustments that could be made with this deck to try to make it go faster. Lean into the Human Kindred strategy. I'm currently testing with this deck in Mythic using Knight Errant and Immodane's Recruiter, which aren't here in this list. But who knows? Maybe we'll see those adaptations in the future. Maybe we'll see the deck make different adaptations to try to go underneath Domain.
So, I mean, Max, is there a reasonable solution with Boros Aggro to Sunfall, depopulate, temporary lockdown? Do we have a path, or do we just have to get into a third color? Do we have to play blue?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I really think the deck is just mainly trying to get underneath Domain cards like Sunfall. You do, of course, have Thalia. You do have Peacekeeper and Gobakon, as we pointed out. For Lockdown, you have Destroy Evil. You might want to include more than 2 copies of that in your sideboard if you're seeing a lot of that. I think the deck also secondarily against cards like Sunfall are seeking to have some sort of card advantage, going wide, being able to rebuild quickly. So there are cards in the deck, Recruitment Officer, you have Army in a Can with Wandering Emperor in the sideboard there. Adeline and Anim Pakal do a really good job of going wide quickly. So there's always the chance that you can rebuild after the Sunfall, after the board wipe, and just hope that they don't have a second one ready to go. But I think the primary strategy of going underneath is probably going to come into play even more in the coming weeks.
Fair. And I'll add this little side note for our viewers. You may want to max out on Anointed Peacekeepers. My guess is you're going to need 4 of those if you want to have a shot at Domain post board. I would also really highly recommend looking at End the Festivities, given the rise in Azorius Tokens and Soldiers. That card does a number on both of them. I don't know why it's not in the sideboard. It is very strong against both of them historically.
At least one. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
But you know what? Let's move it right along. And I believe we have a unique take here with Simic Artifacts.
All right, Simic Artifacts. Now, while we don't actually have a tournament result for this one, at this point, most people are familiar with Ash Lizzle's astounding 25-0 Mythic run using this archetype in high Mythic play. The strength of the deck lies in its synergy across multiple artifacts. There is, of course, the 2 of Cauldron in the deck, but more significantly, we have full sets of Spyglass Siren, producing map tokens, Ginger Brute, creating a great base for a card that a lot of people haven't seen anything from yet, Zoetic Glyph. And then you also have the 1-cost Wormlet, creating a payoff and becoming an ever-increasing threat as you play more artifacts. The cards I really like, however, aside from the Glyph, you also have Tough Cookie. This card makes your map tokens large threats, preserves your life total in the later game when things go bad. And then also we have Disruption Protocol. This is really the perfect counterspell for the deck, making use of your map tokens when they aren't helping creatures explore, or being used as basis for Tough Cookie's ability or for the Glyph. So you can see the synergy across all those different card types. Lastly, though, I want to talk about 2 new cards, the Sentinel and the Schooner. These have become favorites in multiple decks, multiple formats, and so with powerhouses like this, value coming from just about every slot in the list, it's really no wonder that this deck has become a fan favorite. Credit to Ash Lizzle for piloting it to high Mythic.
So, Max, looking at this, we're playing 2 Agatha Soul Cauldron. Is there a reason? Like, we're definitely not the Cauldron combo deck, so is there a reason for it?
Yeah, I have to wonder about that. I can see where it would put in work, right, with some of the creatures in here, like Tough Cookie and the Surge Engine. But I personally am thinking about, if I test this deck, slotting those out for a full playset of Surge Engine, because I think Surge Engine is just a powerhouse of a card, and it scales. And I just wonder if the deck could be made even faster with a full playset of that instead.
That's fair. And now on to my favorite segment, Brewer's Corner. And we're going to go ahead and kick things off with a submission from Athena the Bun. Thank you so much. Blue Skies. Alrighty, so this has been in the Discord. Athena's been talking about this. She's had a great run as she's been tuning this up, and this has been such a cool list to work with. I love what she did here. So for a long time, I was sitting there looking at the Hottie Djinn lists going, okay, so Cavern of Souls exists, we're done. Like, there is no way to play this like strictly mono blue, counter everything, and then land one big threat and end the game. We just can't do that anymore. So then the question becomes, is there a blue tempo deck that's better than Soldiers? You know, is there a blue tempo deck that's better than Esper, that's better than Azorius Tokens? I don't know that this is, but it's given it a run for its money. And a huge part of that is the fact that this deck makes it really, really difficult to deal with its threat base. Everything flies, and you have this combat research card to just plant on cards like Sleep Cursed Fairy that already have Ward, or to plant on Malcolm, where it's going to gain Ward because it's legendary, along with +1/+1. So it's really tricksy, it's difficult to deal with, there's a number of counters, and at the same time, you're just going to keep on bashing through every turn. They're going to take 2 to 4 points of damage while you're controlling the board and the game state and the tempo. So I love what she pulled together here. I think it's a really cool list.
Oh yeah, very cool, very cool. And I want to introduce the folks to Orzhov Angels, one of my personal builds. The primary purpose of this deck, I was looking at a very hyper aggro filled meta during that week, and I was thinking about a deck that felt good to curve out with, and also would scale and snowball as the game went on. So we've got creatures in here like Lunarch Veteran, which provide a base for life gain. I saw that Resplendent Angel got a reprint, so the whole goal of the deck is to be able to gain that 5 life in a turn and be able to create those tokens. We have a full playset of Steel Seraph, which makes the life gain a lot easier, in conjunction with the Archangel of Wrath, which with Giada, you're hoping comes in as like a 4/5, a 5/6, after you've already had Giada out on turn 2. And then Voice of the Blessed is one of those big payoffs for lifelink as well, that just, gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's something that the opponent just cannot deal with. The whole deck has evasion. The whole deck is going to land its hits. So, I really think that it shows its value there. The sideboard does need some work. You can see where I've got like a copy of Get Lost, split with Destroy Evil. Kutsil's Flanker is a little known card that is sort of an answer to board wipes, kind of punishes board wipes a little bit. So I don't know. I'm experimenting with different pieces. There are also other pieces I'm considering, like Elias Ilkor, which allow for even more life gain. So we'll see how the deck evolves.
Fair. And we're going to move it along to Merfolk. Credit to Majin666. This is a fascinating list. So Majin went with Let's Play Merfolk, and I'm not entirely sure on all the card choices here, but there is something to be said for a deck that gets to really take advantage of Deeproot Pilgrimage. I don't like that we don't have Mutavault, because that's what really makes this fun and explore. You know, being able to just activate it to become a 2/2 Merfolk, then tap it for mana. So it's like for an extra mana on any spell, you just get an extra 1/1 hexproof Merfolk. But this still has a lot of value to it. We haven't really seen Tishana's Tidebinder, that coming out party yet, so I'm very curious to see how good this card is. Really haven't gotten a chance to see it. We know Sentinel of the Nameless City is fantastic. I'm not entirely sure why there isn't a fourth copy of that, but it apparently got split into Vidali and Mindsinger, which maybe we'll see. But either way, this is a fascinating list. It's got a lot of play to it. Definitely needs some more tuning. My guess is it's a little bit underpowered, but that doesn't mean it can't work.
Oh yeah, very nice. This next list for the Brewers Corner is Boros Discover. Credit to Hasui Mirai. Forgive me if I mispronounced there as well. This deck is value packed. That's really the best way to define it. Not only does it have Discover within it, which if you've played against Discover, you know how value packed that is. Your opponent being able to find anything of value off of it is impactful. And Geological Appraiser, along with Contorious Con, are two of the bigger pieces for that. It's also got scattered throughout these prototype creatures in the form of Steel Seraph and the Combat Thresher, especially. And I presume these are there to scale. The whole deck scales with the adventure side of Imidane's Recruiter, with these prototype creatures. And Virtue of Courage is you're looking at a lack of 2-drops. Virtue of Courage is there in the full playset to act as sort of a removal piece in the 2-drop slot, should you need it to be. Sideboard has Wedding Announcement, bit of a go wide strategy, and that one end the festivities. So somebody's catching on to the value of that card lately with all the tokens lists.
Fair. And that brings us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 10 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 3 of Ixalan Standard?
Well, Brewers have shifted back from the week 1 struggle of toppling Domain with new cards and new decks, going back towards strengthening older archetypes in Standard instead with the new cards. So we're seeing play from cards like Deep Cavern Bat, Subterranean Schooner. These are among the cards that have enriched the format from the new set and kept decks like Esper Midrange and Azorius Soldiers in power in the top tiers. Whereas archetypes such as Gruul Dinos, Rakdos Midrange, Sultai, and 4-color Reanimator, they're still out there in the shadows of the meta, tending to their wounds and learning from their mistakes after week 1. Question will be, are any of these going to crawl out of the shadows to claim a rightful place among the tier 1s? Next week's results will certainly tell the tale, but what treachery awaits us among the standard decks next time, Darth Rictus?
So I think it's time to acknowledge that white is just the strongest color in Standard currently. Between Leyline Binding and Archangel for Domain, Virtue of Loyalty, Dennick, Rafine, and Waifu for Esper, and the usual medley of threats across Azorius Soldiers with Wedding Announcement for tokens, it's present in all 4 Tier 1 archetypes and our strongest Tier 2 archetype as well. Control, Ramp, Aggro, Midrange, all of them feature different white cards in them at this point. So the question at this point to me is whether we've already run through all the potential brews or if there is a sleeper pick to be found as the format moves forward. Now, some sets, they come out, the metagame puzzle is solved by week 3, but I don't know that that's the case here, and I'm honestly hoping that Ixalan gave us a few more ways to shake things up. Regardless, at this point, you're watching this, you are probably either settling into a tier 1 archetype that you want to know the ins and outs of, such as Esper Midrange, and you're just trying to figure out the sideboarding for it, or you're pushing into brew mode, and you're looking for that magic bullet to kill the queen and subjects. So personally, I'm hoping we see some brewers come out blazing next weekend, and if you're watching this and you've got a hot brew, send it to us. Put it in the comments. We want to see it, we want to know what you're up to, and we want to see you succeed. Knock off Domain, for me, if nothing else.
Please. Oh man, but it is going to be an exciting week 3 in Ixalan. Be sure to stay ahead of the pack by tuning in every week to these videos. Leave us a comment on anything we've discussed today regarding Standard and let us know how you see the meta shifting over the coming weeks. While you're there, like and subscribe for more States of the Meta, our podcast, draft guides, and shorts. Also, if you can support us even further by joining the Rebellion down below with the join button, either $1 or $3 a month, we would be grateful to you. And thank you to anyone who's already shown us that love just in the first couple months.
Until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.